Friends Joshua Hauser lived with his wife, Kirby Davenport, and her 3-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. They lived in a mobile home in Indian Trails near Kirby's parents. On the 16th of May 2012, Joshua stayed home to watch Kilah while Kirby was at work. Kirby called at 2:30 p.m. and spoke with Kilah, who sounded normal and said she was having a good day. Kirby's mother called and spoke with Kilah again at 5:30 p.m. Kilah said she had eaten, taken a bath, and was waiting for her mother to come home. But then, at 6:07 p.m., Joshua called 911. He told the dispatcher that Kilah had urinated in her clothes, fallen from a standing position, and injured her head. Joshua said he picked her up and shook her, but she was not responsive. The 911 dispatcher alerted the Union County Sheriff's Department because Joshua's extremely hectic and excited demeanor made the dispatcher uncomfortable and raised his suspicion that a crime may have occurred. Emergency personnel arrived at 6:17 p.m. Kyla was in the front seat of a truck parked outside the home. EMTs noticed that she was not breathing properly and that her eyes had rolled toward the top of her head. In a statement prepared approximately an hour after arriving at the scene, emergency rescue volunteer Robert Holloway wrote that Joshua told him that Kyla had fallen and hit her chin. Joshua told Kirby on the phone that he heard a thud when Kyla went into the bathroom to clean herself after urinating in her pants. He said that Kyla was getting up off the floor when he walked into the bedroom. When Joshua scooped her up and took her pants off, Kyla keeled backward and defecated on herself. Joshua claimed that he punched a hole in the wall because the 911 dispatcher could not understand him when he was trying to give his address. Volunteers thought Joshua seemed calm and detached until he spoke on the phone to his wife, at which time he raised his voice to seem anxious and nervous. Kirby's mother also testified that Joshua exhibited no emotion later at the hospital. Kyla arrived at the hospital in a coma. The attending neurosurgeon noted that internal blood visible on the CT scan reflected a recent injury, not something that was days or weeks old. The doctor noticed two types of skull fractures. The first being a diastatic fracture on the suture line in the skull that grows and molds together by the time the child is 18 months old. The suture line had been broken apart, an injury which the doctor testified required significant force. The second fracture was a crack running through the hard portion of the skull. Kyla also had bleeding on both sides of her head, in between the lobes of her brain and under the lining of her brain. Immediate surgery was needed to remove blood clots, stop bleeding, and treat the swelling in Kyla's brain. After removing a portion of Kyla's skull, the doctor removed blood clots and blood that had soaked in between the lobes of Kyla's brain. During the procedure, her brain swelled outward between 1/2 of an inch to an inch beyond her skull. The continued swelling required further cutting from the skull, but even then, her brain was so swollen that the doctors had difficulty replacing Kyla's scalp after surgery. She was in the hospital for a total of 65 days. Y'all, can you do me a favor? Please follow me on Instagram. My previous Instagram was deleted because they're a bunch of wankers. Link is in the description. Now, due to the injuries to her brain, she was no longer able to walk, stand up on her own, hold up her head, and feed herself. For 6 months after surgery, Kyla required a tracheotomy tube in her neck to help her breathe. She required around-the-clock care, which her mother and grandmother provided. The neurosurgeon testified that Kyla's brain injuries were the most severe kind, resembling those that can be inflicted by injection from a car, war wounds, or a fall from a significant height. Shortly after riding with Kyla to the hospital, Joshua returned to his home with Lieutenant Brian Helms of the Union County Sheriff's Department. Special Agent Brandon Blackman of the State Bureau of Investigation, and both of them photographed all the home. After being asked about the hole in the wall by the officers, Joshua said he punched it in frustration when the 911 operator couldn't understand what he was saying. Joshua asked the officers to leave when they intimated a belief that he was the one that hurt Kyla. Later, Special Agent Blackman reviewed the photographs and saw what appeared to be a blonde hair in the hole in the wall. He testified that this was inconsistent with Joshua's statement that he had created the hole with his fists, because of course there's no blonde hair on his fists, causing the officers to seek consent from Kirby to search the home and collect the hair. Lieutenant Helms and Special Agent Blackman went back to the home with crime scene investigator Chris McTeague. McTeague removed 2 head hairs from the wall, which he testified were not laying on top of the rock but were partially embedded and provided resistance when he tried to pull them from the damaged area. Subsequent DNA analysis showed that the hairs belonged to Kyla. Both hairs were anagen phase hairs, meaning that they were actively growing when they were removed and would have required force to be pulled from Kyla's head. Joshua was arrested following the collection of the hairs. He waived his Miranda rights and agreed to give a recorded interview to detectives. When officers accused him of taking Kyla's life, he asserted his right to counsel and ended the interview. Joshua testified at trial that while he was cooking dinner on the night in question, Kyla told him she needed to pee. Joshua saw that her pants were already wet, so he her on the butt and told her to go into the master bathroom to wash up. He then heard a thud from the bathroom, and when he looked in, he saw Kyla trying to get up from her hands and knees. Joshua tried to hold her up, but Kyla went stiff and defecated on herself. That's when he called 911. He claimed that he punched the wall in frustration because, again, the dispatcher couldn't understand him. Eventually, the jury found Joshua guilty of felony child abuse, inflicting serious bodily injury. The trial court then proceeded with a separate penalty phase necessary for the jury to determine the existence of aggravating factors alleged by the state. You see, several of Joshua's family members left the courtroom crying as soon as they heard the guilty verdict. All along, they have said that they believe Joshua is innocent. The prosecution argued that there were 2 aggravating factors: that Kyla was very young and that the crime was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. The jury agreed with that, and the judge sentenced Joshua to 7 to 10 years. The evidence showed that the assault caused immediate life-threatening and permanent injuries to Kyla's skull and brain. Kyla and her family were in the courtroom for the verdict and sentencing. Before Joshua was sentenced, Kyla's grandmother, Leslie, read an impact statement. She said that her family let Joshua into their home and he failed Kirby, the mother. He failed Kyla, the daughter. Leslie went on to say that Kyla is imprisoned in her body now and that if she had real justice, his sentencing would have fallen under her law. You see, after this incident, Kyla's law was passed in North Carolina, increasing sentences for people convicted of child abuse. Terry, who was Joshua's father, he said, "I didn't have the money to hire all the experts. The state had all their experts. We didn't have. My son didn't have but one here to testify." Kirby herself said she was glad this is all over, that she and her family can put this chapter behind them and continue to focus on taking care of Kyla. Kirby said that the guilty verdict was justice for her daughter and she doesn't feel like the sentence was enough. Now, Joshua was sentenced in February of 2014. In March 2014, unfortunately, Kyla died. So I did a little bit of digging, and this is his incarceration record. So as you can see over here, his conviction date was the 27th of February, and he received 7 years, as I mentioned. However, because she died, and because of Kyla's law, I think he was retried. And as you can see here, on the 2nd of December 2015, he was sentenced for a minimum term of 13 years. Therefore, his release date is going to be in 2025. This is his incarceration information. This man abused her so bad that she became disabled, so to speak, incapacitated, and then she died. He should never ever be released. Comment, tell me what you think.
Hauser is now serving a 17-year prison sentence for her murder, and Kyla has become a poster child for the fight against child abuse.
Tonight, just days before the 2-year anniversary of Kyla's death, her family is sharing never-before-seen photos and home video only with WBTV, and we are hearing Kyla's voice. Her mom, Kirby, has been mostly silent about what happened to Kyla until now. She is finally ready to share her story and answer questions many have asked. Kirby, very open tonight. Nothing was off limits. Why are you willing to talk now?
It's my turn to have a voice, and it's my turn to speak for Kyla.
The anger and sadness are still very raw for Kyla's mom, Kirby Ermity.
I wake up every morning and I wish it was just a nightmare that I could wake up from and that she would be there.
This was Kilah Davenport. Home video shows a typical 3-year-old riding a rocking horse on Mother's Day 2012. Not a care in the world. It's difficult to imagine the explosion of violence just 3 days later that turned that vibrant little girl.
An accident. Your daughter needs emergency brain surgery.
When did you find out that he had abused her?
That night I got a telephone call.
Hours later, Hauser was in handcuffs, charged with child abuse. Did you ever imagine he was capable of such violence?
Never in a million years, and it makes me sick. Because it's not like it's not like I was in an abusive situation.
Kirby says Kyla never showed any kind of fear of Hauser.
This is her taking pictures.
This is Kyla's camera. They can't bear to delete a single photo, not even one of the man who serves time for Kyla's murder. After nearly 4 years sitting with her grief and shock, Kirby looks back on the man she was with for 1 year and 10 months, the ex-husband she now calls a monster.
There were never those signs.
She says he was never violent, but it was Hauser's lack of emotion Kirby now says should have been a clue.
There's that sign of, oh, well, he didn't react to when his grandma died. Of course, that's a sign. But at the time, you look at someone and you think, oh man, he's been through a lot. He's been through a lot of heartache. That's why he doesn't show it. Or is it because he grew up thinking that men don't show their weakness? That's what you think. You don't think, oh Lord, he's a psychopath. He's gonna hurt my kid. You don't think that. Because I sure as heck wouldn't have ever been with him.
Do you ever blame yourself?
I have survivor's guilt. I blame myself 90% of the time. But I only blame myself because I feel like maybe I should have seen that as a red flag when he wasn't, when he had no emotion.
What are your emotions as that anniversary approaches?
I tried to get people to understand that I mourn the healthy, happy Kyla, and I mourn the hurt Kyla. But with it coming up on 2 years, it's no different. It's still just as hard as it was the day that she passed away in my arms. When Kyla stopped breathing in Kirby's arms, she tried CPR. They worked with emergency crews, but Kyla didn't make it.